Hello guys, you know what's worse than a old TT? An old TT without working HVAC, and that's something that we will cover in today's episode. The car you see here, or maybe it's a plane, as it hangs in the air more than it drives, I bought almost 4 years ago. Unfortunately, the AC was not working even then. According to the previous owner, it would be enough to replace the compressor clutch, but honestly, I've never been motivated enough to diagnose it, maybe because I made like 200 kilometers by year, but I finally got around to it, and this season I plan to drive it a little, so it would be nice to have AC working back. I will mention right away that we'll take a look at the entire cooling system, so if you have problems with your fans or engine overheating apart from the air conditioning, you will probably find many useful tips here. So let's start by making sure that what the seller said is exactly what's happening. I turn on the engine along with the air conditioning, but without the econ mode. At this point, after a few seconds, the controller should send a signal to engage the compressor clutch. As you can see, unfortunately, this is not happening. I checked it with a meter, but there was no voltage at all. At this point, it would be very helpful to check the error history, so I will come straight to the scanning tool. And you can immediately tell that we have problems with two sensors. Both of them are needed for the AC to operate properly. Let's start with the F129. It's located under the hood in upper left corner, and error related to it might indicate its damage, a break in the circuit, or most likely low pressure in the AC system. It's worth to mention that after 2001, this sensor was replaced by the G65, which performs the same function but works in a slightly different way, as instead of simple wire closing, it sends a duty cycle signal. I don't have this sensor, so if you want to diagnose it, I refer you to the video included in the description. As for the F129, shorting the lower left and right pins sent a signal to the fan controller to activate both fans on the first gear, while the upper left and right pins are responsible for engaging the compressor clutch. In my case, forcing the first gear of the fans only caused one of them to spin. This is another problem to solve because the fans should always rotate together. Before we move on to the fans, I just wanted to quickly take a look at the compressor itself. I know someone will complain because I could have checked the clutch's operation without removing the compressor, but don't forget that these components are over 20 years old and you have to expect everything here, especially damage to the compressor shell, which may not be visible at the first glance under the hood. The compressor seemed perfect with no leaks and even a little bit of nice oil dripping from inside, but the sound it made while turning the belt wheel bothered me. For the purpose of a video, I decided to disassemble it and take a look at what's happening inside. I expected to see mechanical damage to the pistons or cylinders due to its age, but nothing like that happened. Everything looked like new. Just when I was about to lament that I had completely destroyed a decent compressor, it turned out that as usual, the devil is in the details. My attention was drawn to the broken metal plates, which turned out to be a valve plates. According to what I read on the internet, this is most common problem with this model of compressor along with the control valve. Although these plates are available for purchase, I would have to replace the valve, bearings and give it a new set of seals and a clutch. This would cost me almost the same as a new compressor, and I would not be even sure that I had not broken anything along this way, so I invested in a new one. If you plan to do a similar job and are able to, I would recommend to remove the bumper and front panel. It is much easier and faster than crawling under the car and struggling with the cramped engine compartment. Thanks to this, I was able to visually evaluate the condition of the condenser, radiator and discover a few interesting things that I had not seen before. Replacing the compressor without the front panel is a simple pleasure. After tightening two screws and installing the belt, the job is practically done. I also immediately connect the hoses, remembering to install new gaskets. As I mentioned before, each of the radiator fans has two speeds. This means that the fan can either run at the maximum speed or about halfway. In the plug you will find three wires where one of them is ground while the other two are positives. One of the positives has resistors that limit the current flowing to the fan motor and thus decreases the speed. These resistors may burn out over the time, causing the fan to lose one of the mentioned gears. Here's an important note. Those fans are present in many cars and have various part numbers. Unfortunately, sellers tend to lump them together, suggesting that they are interchangeable, which is not true. The first fan I bought turned out to be a single-speed fan. If not for my distrust, I would install it in the car and then wonder why the heck it's still not working. I ordered a second fan that was sold under the same part number but was nearly twice as expensive. This one is visually different and has two speeds. Before we move on, I want to take a look at few details. As you can see, there was a leak that caused corrosion of the power steering cooler, but unfortunately I wasn't able to find a replacement at the time of the recording, so I'm leaving it as it is for now. I will use some brake fluid to remove the remainings from the plastic parts. Another issue that I couldn't ignore was this terrible harness on the fan control module. Connections in these areas should not be soldered, but it would have been forgivable if someone had bothered to secure them properly instead of just wrapping them with tape. Mentioned module is directly responsible for the operation of the fans and AC, and its location under the battery doesn't help because dirt often accumulates there, causing a lot of moisture and intermittent harness issues. After fixing the connections, I make sure they are in very good shape with no oxidized connections anywhere. I had a big problem disconnecting the radiator hoses. They have plastic fittings and I was afraid of breaking them because such old plastic can be very brittle, but at some point I was so frustrated that I bent them with all my strength and they finally came off. Fortunately, nothing broke. Take a look at this beautiful original 20 years old dehumidifier. I hope no one will complain that I'm replacing parts instead of repairing them. In my opinion, it would kill the new compressor very soon. Assembling the front slam panel outside the car was a simple pleasure. I just made sure to not bend the condenser wires too much and screwed the dehumidifier properly. These wires have small O-rings that needs to be properly seated or else there might be leaks. Everything needs to be done with precision and tightened as perpendicular as possible. Finally, I installed the reinforcement together with the cleaned trunk lock and then screw in the thermo switch. Here you should keep in mind that it comes in two types with a triangular or square plug, so choose it individually and remember that this is not a temperature sensor but a thermo switch. Its operation consists of closing the circuit depending on the temperature reached in the radiator and works fully independently of the AC system. You can simulate its operation by shorting the appropriate wires in its connection. When reattaching the slam, I immediately secure it with the top two screws. After tightening them, I move on to the front beam, which includes my intercooler. Remember to use new O-rings for the cables and make sure they fit properly on the mounts. It took me 3 attempts to fit the top cable correctly. Electrical cables cannot be mixed due to different connectors and wire lengths. Now let's deal with the second sensor we saw in the error history. Its wiring was also in poor condition. I fixed it and ensured the sensor itself is working properly. Unfortunately, it wasn't. I found out that the sensor is either very expensive or unavailable. However, here's some good news that nobody seems to mention on forums for some reason. You can replace this sensor with a newer model with the part number you see now on screen. It's dirt cheap and works great. You just need to replace the old plug with a new 2-pin one. For testing purposes, I bought another sensor of the old type and compared their readings. They were identical. My Audi new Beetle will also get new headlights because I honestly couldn't stand the old ones anymore. Look at the difference. The car immediately looks like it's worth 10 pounds more. And here I want to mention a very cool thing I found when I was looking for information on repairing the AC system. There is a cheat sheet made by Rostec guys that makes the whole process a lot simpler. I will link it in video description. At this point my work is done and all that's left is to have the car tested for leaks and recharge the refrigerant, which I did. Unfortunately, I can't show you, but the AC is back in business. It's been a few weeks and there have been no leaks, so I consider the repair a success. Thanks for your attention, and if you have any additional questions or ideas for videos, feel free to comment. Take care.